Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Keynote podcast on speaking engagement. I'm your host, Ryan Catherwood. On the show this week, one of my favorite people in the advancement space, Patrick Auerbach. Patrick is the former Senior Associate Vice President for Alumni Relations at the University of Southern California. And then he was my colleague at CMAC for a couple of years, and we got to work together on all different types of consulting projects in the area of alumni engagement. But about 6 months ago, Patrick switched gears and he became the Vice President for Advancement at the Jewish Community Foundation of Los Angeles. I wanted to have him on the keynote because I wanted to have him share what it's been like to lead advancement for an organization that leans into a faith-based affinity as a unifying construct by which people are interested in being donors and giving to charities in the greater Los Angeles area and even more broadly that are aligned with the Jewish faith. This is all very different, as you'll hear Patrick explain, but there's also a lot of similarities to the work we do around identity and affinity-based engagement in higher ed. I know you'll enjoy my conversation with Patrick. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Keynote podcast. If you're already a member, I am so grateful for you being a part of our community. If you're not already, be sure to join us, and we're going to kick off our book club, Reading the Generosity Crisis, coming up in a couple of weeks. And our next Agora is already on the calendar with Mo Cotton Kelly from the UConn Foundation on Friday, June 26th at noon. So you can join and register for those if you are a member as well. All right, thank you so much for listening. Please enjoy my interview with Patrick Auerbach. Patrick Auerbach, thank you so much for being this week's keynote on speaking engagement. It is so good to see you. Thank you for spending some time with me.
It's great to see you as always, Ryan. Whether we're in England, in the United States, on Zoom, or on the ground together, it's always good.
Likewise. I enjoy all the time I get to spend with you, and admittedly, a bit less these days since you transitioned from a fellow CMAC consultant, although officially you're still on the website, to a full-time role as Vice President of Advancement for the Jewish Community Foundation of Los Angeles.
Hmm.
So congratulations on that
Thank you.
fantastic job. We're going to talk all about it. I guess I wanted to see if I could get you to start by sharing a little bit of context with listeners. You know, you spent years leading alumni engagement at the University of Southern California. You did consulting work with Chris Marshall and the CMAC team, along with work for NCAA athletics, which has really been your bread and butter
Hmm.
all along. But what drew you to this particular role?
Thank you. It's great to be here, and that's a great question, Ryan. Actually, one of the most flattering things that could happen for you professionally is when you get a call. And I got a call. I was not seeking this role that I now have landed that you just referenced at the Jewish Community Foundation of LA. They contacted me and told me they had a vice presidency position and they wanted to know if I was interested in considering it. So it wasn't automatic. I still had to go through a robust interview process, but I approached it with intrigue but and with enthusiasm, but not with the foregone conclusion that I actually wanted the position. But the
Yeah.
more I learned about it and about the foundation and what it does for the local LA community in general, and then specifically parts of the Jewish community, it ended up becoming a very intriguing professional opportunity to pursue.
This was an organization that you had been familiar with or were even potentially
No,
involved with, or was this
not.
a bit of a
Thank you.
discovery for you?
Thank you. No, not particularly. I'm born and raised here in Los Angeles and was raised in the Jewish community, in terms of, belonging to a synagogue and having a bar mitzvah and all that good stuff. And
Yeah.
I'm not super observant religiously, but have always had a very strong affinity for my people, for my faith. And I was actually not as familiar. There are many, many organizations here in LA. We have the second largest Jewish community in the US and the third largest in the world and or fourth largest, depending upon how you count. But I had never been involved in any like the Jewish professional world communal organizations, whether it's the Federation or the Foundation, and wasn't even aware of the Foundation's existence until a couple years ago. I happened to meet the gentleman who was the newly appointed CEO, and we had a mutual conversation with an affiliation I had with my former employer, USC, and then a couple of years later, out of the blue, they have an opportunity that I guess I made an impression on them and they wanted to follow up with me to see if this might be something that I would now pursue in my professional journey. And again, I wasn't expecting it. It's always flattering to get contacted. not only by a search firm, which maybe is casting a wide net, but when you are the target audience, when a human being actually reaches out to you and asks you, and it's not just some general, spray and pray type email, it's very flattering. I will say that.
No
Still,
doubt,
it
no
didn't like
doubt.
automatically make me want the job, but the more I met the people in the organization and learned about what it does and what its impact is, the more intrigued I became.
Well, I'm just glad you weren't miserable doing consulting work with myself and Chris and these other folks.
Not at
And
all.
that
Not at
it
all. And
just
as a
happened
matter
to
of
be
fact,
a right thing, right time. So
this
you
is what
get.
they all, this is what your parents or your mentors will always tell you when you least expect it, it's going to happen. And that could, after a while, Ryan, as we both know, and many of our friends and colleagues know, it could sound pretty cliche. And oh yeah, we've heard that before. But literally, when you're not looking for it, and it suddenly comes and grabs you, it actually, it actually does happen. Now, I think that these types of things in someone's professional and personal life are the result of everything you put out in the universe, all the connections you make, the hands you shake, the impressions that you make. And there's an expression that I always really appreciated in my world and alumni relations about people might not remember exactly like, who you are and what your name was. They might remember, but the thing they're going to remember most about you is how you made them feel. And that's something that I've really carried forward with me through, a wonderful 23 plus years at the University of Southern California, and then with the consulting work that I had the opportunity to do with you and Chris Marshall and several other colleagues. So I just think that like where I've landed now, I haven't completely ruled out the consulting. I've still got a couple of fires burning off to the side, but my professional focus has indeed shifted, and it's been a wonderful journey that I'm excited to talk about today.
Yeah, well, talk a little bit about what felt familiar to you right away, and then match
Mhm.
that up with your experience, perhaps more so with the role at USC that feels completely different to what you're doing now.
So yeah, in terms of what felt familiar, I mean, just the parlance, like the terminology we use, the language we speak about advancement and development. A lot of the concepts are very similar about um, stewardship, about gift planning, like all these pieces of advancement that are kind of integral to the advancement enterprise at the higher education level. They all translated right over. Very familiar with community foundation work. The difference is that the organization for which I'm working now, we are not raising money for ourselves. Whereas at an institution of higher education, I'm not going to say 100%, but we'll say 99.9%, you are raising money specifically for that institution or some part or aspect of that institution. At the foundation at which I now work, about 97% of our more than $200 million a year that we sent out into the community last year did not go towards our own efforts, went towards whoever our clients or our donors, we actually call them clients, whatever charity or philanthropy they wanted to impact. So whether it was something that might be specifically Jewish, like their synagogue, or like security efforts, which are unfortunately an important reality in today's world, about 70% of the philanthropy that our clients or our donors at the foundation want to impact were for those types of purposes. The other 30% secular. It could be for fire relief. Obviously, we had devastating fires here in Los Angeles in 2025. It could be for homelessness. It could be for, youth literacy. Anything that really touches the heart of our clients is where they send their philanthropic dollars. Our role as a foundation is to really inspire philanthropy, but we're their philanthropic partners. We're actually like a boutique philanthropic bank. And so, for example, you put your money with us, we're not going to spend it on ourselves. If you're fundraising at a university, and there's nothing wrong with this, you're fundraising for the university, and they're going to spend that money on their own internal needs, whether it's academic programs, whether it's student life, whether it's capital projects, scholarships for students, they're going to spend it on their own needs. The money that we raise at the foundation, 97% of it doesn't even go towards our foundation. It goes towards external philanthropies. And our mission is to strengthen our world, to strengthen our community to better our world. So we're strengthening our community to make the world a better place. And
Is
it's
it fair to say,
fascinating
Patrick, when
work.
you
So
are
there are some key
working,
differences.
that's a big difference. Yeah, and I actually wanted to ask you a little bit more about that because I think a lot of listeners who are in the higher ed space, that might be kind of a new conceptually. So when you go and you're working with a new client, and are you going in there and saying, "Hey, recommending a series of charities," or are you really doing more
Great question.
listening first and be
Right.
like, okay, based on all the things that I heard, let me go do some research on the best way, or maybe some combination of both.
Yeah, thank you. And I think every organization, every university is unique from one another. And I would say the same calculus is true for every community foundation or local nonprofit is different from one another. What's intriguing about the work I do now is when I'm speaking to prospects, and you have prospects in higher ed, right? They're potential donors for you. We have prospects for our community foundation, which are potential clients. I'm not trying to get them to give money to us so that we can be a stronger organization per se. I'm trying to get them to be philanthropic, period. So, in a way, an interesting word to use here is we're kind of agnostic to what they want to support, but we want them to do it in the context of the Jewish community. So, because there's a tenet of our tradition, which is tikkun olam, which means repairing the world. So it's ingrained in us. It's kind of like on the church side, when they tithe, you're collecting you're to be philanthropic to help the community, right? Tikkun olam is a concept about repairing the world. So our clients are very philanthropically minded, and they are very diverse in terms of their the type of perhaps Jewish life that or Jewish observance that they practice, or even their political positions can be very, they could really run the gamut. They could really be across the
Yeah.
spectrum, to the left, to the right, or in the middle. So they have varying interests, whether it's specifically related to our community of faith or it's related to like general issues and challenges that are in front of us here in the community of Los Angeles. So our clients, we want them to be more philanthropic. And instead of just giving directly to those charities, of course, we want them to work with us, because what we can do is we can manage their money. We have a very strong investment committee, so we want to get them the best possible returns on their philanthropic investment. And then we also have a team, and this speaks to your other question. We have a team called the Center for Design Philanthropy. It is a team of 6 people, and they literally vet more than 3,000 nonprofits a year. And they recommend to
Is
our
that
clients.
3,000 just local in Los Angeles, or are
Yes,
those all
almost
over?
all of them
Yeah.
are local.
Wow.
Some of them actually are American Friends of various Israel related philanthropies. So you can't, in order to be a 501(c)(3), you can't donate money to a foreign country, but you could
Sure.
donate money to the American Friends of, and that money can then be sent. And that's, not just for Israel, that's for a lot of nations that, have cooperative agreements with the United States. So, but what happens is the team I was just talking about, the internal team at our foundation, they're actually responsible for researching and vetting and tracking how effective these various nonprofits and organizations are, so that when our clients are putting their money in, like a local charity that deals with battered women or deals with homelessness or deals with like, park beautification, what have you, our internal team is on top of that, so that they can advise our clients if a client has a particular passion for like animal safety or for the Humane Society. We've had some really fascinating conversations with these people. They're philanthropic, and or like they might see a story on the news about something and be like, wow, I want to give to a charity, but they don't know where to start. The advantage of coming to us is that's our job. That's our job, is to bring their philanthropy to life. What's interesting is our competitors are not other nonprofits. Our competitors are like the big banks who offer donor advised funds, and they're offering that because it's an opportunity for them to do more business. We're offering it because it's an opportunity for us to actually exercise and realize philanthropy of our clients. So, for example, if you're with a big bank and you see a story on the news about a terrible thing that happened locally, and you call your bank and say, I want to send a grant from my donor advised fund, where can I send it? They're probably going to just do a Google search and be like, well, here's something, you know what I mean? It might be just something that anybody can do. Whereas if you're a client of ours and you have your philanthropic dollars parked with us, and you, again, a friend tells you about an organization that deals with autistic children. I mean, again, it could be anything. And you want to know, hey, I want to support that. What would my $10,000 grant do? We have a team that will actually track that all down for you because you're our client. And I think that's just
Yeah.
benevolent, wonderful, very meaningful work.
Yeah. I think it's fantastic. I bet you're learning a ton too. It's because it's quite different. What surprised you
I
the
will tell you
most
about
about
one.
all this? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll say, I remember when I was at USC for the first 7.5 years, I worked in athletics and had an amazing experience. The highs and the lows, the volatility, the excitement, the heartbreak. It sounds like ABC Wide World of Sports, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. You learn a lot about that. And I remember, Ryan, I moved over to Alumni Association. And in my first 6 months of being in the Alumni Association, I felt like I learned more in those first 6 months being on that side of the university than I did in 7.5 years in athletics, just in terms of learning about the university. It was amazing. It was such an exciting learning curve that carried forward with me for the next 15, 16 years until I left the institution. I have now been at the Jewish Community Foundation for just under 5 months, and it's almost the same narrative. I've learned more in the first 5 months of being in this job than I learned in my last 15 years of being in the Alumni Association. Why? Because it's related work, but it's also a completely new world.
Quite
So
different. Quite different.
it's a really exciting learning narrative. I still love, hearing about what's going on in higher ed. Do I miss it? Not really. It's time for other people to perhaps lead and help to usher in the next great era for that industry. But there are different things you learn being in the role that I'm in now.
Let's talk a little bit about the idea of affinity and affiliation
Hmm.
and what you've discovered about how people are thinking about their faith and their connection with the Jewish community.
Hmm.
How would you define affinity in your current work?
I would say I'll take this as when I look at how I used to define affinity in my previous work in alumni relations. Affinity was typically identity based, right?
Yeah.
So it would be based on like I'm a member of the Black community or the Asian, Latino, LGBTQ plus. Like you had affinities identity wise, or you might have had an affinity to your school, to the business school, or the engineering school, or the communication school. The affinities that I now work with are more cause related affinities. I have an affinity for social justice. I have an affinity for voter rights. I have an affinity for, community engagement, for gang intervention. The affinities that I deal with now are different than the affinities I dealt with in the higher ed context. And the difference between an affinity and an affiliation is that affiliation to me sounds more not necessarily transactional, but maybe a little less formal or a little more casual, whereas an affinity is very deep rooted and is based on values. Whereas affiliations can be based on values, but oh yeah, I'm affiliated with somebody because we happen to be in the same meeting, or because somebody above told us you two have to work together. Oh, so we're affiliated. You know what I mean? Or your institution signs a contract with someone and therefore you're now affiliated. Affinity, again, these are, and I did not do an AI or chat GPT search like everybody seems to be doing nowadays. I
It's
really
okay if you
avoided that because I
did.
wanted to think, yeah, you're welcome. But what I really wanted to do is look at, okay, I'm looking at when I go to work each day now, what are how am I working with clients and their affinities in this context versus how I worked with alumni and donors at USC or any other institution? And their affinity was number one, the institution, but number two, the secondary affinity would have been, like I said before, one of those identities, either based on like their ethnicity or their race, or perhaps their academic leaning. Now I look at affinity in this context as more cause related.
As you have become aware of the types of people that are going to be partners with the Jewish Community Foundation, have you discovered common denominators about the individual histories of these folks, or is everybody really different?
Everyone is very different. I think the common denominators are that you're either Jewish, and we have some non-Jewish clients, and we have some in particular who maybe have like a Jewish stepfather, like they raised in, they might be Catholic or Protestant or any number of religions, but they have like somebody really important in their life who happened to be Jewish. So therefore, they somehow wanted to honor that love or that respect by having a fund with the Jewish Community Foundation of LA. Um, so, but again, the one common denominator is you're philanthropic. Because if you're not philanthropic, we have nothing to, I mean, not that we don't like you, but we're not your jam. So there is a very strong likelihood that you're never going to have anything to do with us if you're not philanthropic, right? Or if somebody in your family wasn't philanthropic. So that's the common denominator. Very likely you are, you have some sort of connection to the Jewish people and you're philanthropic. But from
And the
there,
Jewish
as you just mentioned, everything is anything is on the table from there. What your interests are, what you want to support. A lot of our clients support their alma maters, which is really cool. So I get to dip my toe back in, higher education. That's wonderful. But they might support like their kids' summer camp. They might support like their kids' nonprofit music school. There's all kinds of things that people want to do. So diversity is definitely something I work with all the time.
Is it fair to say that majority of the people that are your clients are practicing Jewish faith? And
Um,
what have you discovered about that?
It's interesting. You have talks with people about their values and about what's important to them. And obviously, a lot of times being Jewish comes up. But again, like with any religion, and especially with with the religious community, like the Jewish world is extremely diverse in so many
Yeah,
ways, not only politically, but also ethnically. You know,
yeah.
um, in America, you think of, most people view Jews as white people because we have some European roots. But the reality is a big branch of the Jewish community are Sephardic, which means they come from the Iberian Peninsula. And a lot of them are in Mizrahi, which technically means Eastern, which means they come from what we today look at as the Arab world. Most of the people, for example, in Israel are people who are brown, not white. There's a lot of misconception out there, but in the United States, most of the Jewish community here is Ashkenazi. So you get into all these very interesting, deep conversations with people, and they might not be super religious or orthodox. They might be rather reformed and they might be very secular, but they have a very, very strong cultural connection. So the best way to describe the Jewish community is it's a people. You know what I
Mm,
mean? That's the best way to describe us, with a ton of diversity. In the United States nowadays, Jews of color make up 15% of the 7.5 million Jews in the United States. But again, when people typically think of somebody Jewish in the US, you would probably visualize somebody who looks European.
mm,
It's not that simple. So I deal with people. I deal with people of Mexican heritage who are Jewish. I deal with people, obviously, of European heritage, of Middle Eastern heritage. But again, the common denominator is they have a connection to the Jewish people, but more so that they're philanthropic. And some of them are really passionate about Jewish causes. Others of them are really passionate about general causes, that kind of span all different faith groups or all different groups of people if you don't have a religion.
yes. So do you find that you are playing into or emphasizing a Jewish affinity when you're having conversations with donors, such that you mentioned that there is some competition with big banks in terms of how people might, and so like I guess this what I'm asking is, do you try to um play up, one's
Yeah.
inclination towards supporting the Jewish
Yeah. So
affinity?
here's the deal. So, the way our business model works is that if you have a fund with us, like a donor advised fund, or you have an endowment with us, the way it works is, well, why should I? And, we'll get a question. Why should I open my donor advised fund with you when I can do it at one of the big name branded banks and they only charge 60 basis points, meaning they only charge 0.6% as a management fee? You know what we charge? We charge 100 basis points. So we charge 1%. Why would I go with you instead of them when it's so much cheaper? Well, first of all, because that's all we charge is 1%. They charge you zero point 0.6 basis points, but they charge you every time they make an investment with your money. There's a cost. There's all these hidden fees. When it all washes out, if you were to do an analysis, and trust me, we've had people on our side do the analysis, it actually works out to about the same. Sometimes the banks are actually 1.1 or 1.2%, and we are 1% regardless, right? So, but so that's one argument, is you could use the flat out, the quantitative, here's what the fees are. And some of our clients understandably are very fee sensitive. They want to be philanthropic, but at the same time they want to get the best deal for the money that's being managed. Here's the flip side. Part of our fees, our 1%, goes towards our operation,
Right.
which then again we then do some grant making on our own. Again, as said earlier, it's less than 3% of the total philanthropy, but we do grant making. So you're actually supporting the Jewish community while being philanthropic if your money is with us. So that is kind of that value sale that you could say, well, yeah, first of all, the BPS, the base points that I just articulated earlier, we might be 40 base points higher, but at the end of the day, we're probably all things equal because we don't give you all the little hidden fees and investment charges. But at the same time,
But you get to have Patrick to work with, and the group that's
well, there you go. What's
employed.
not to love? I
Yeah.
appreciate that. But no, so again, and Ryan, all these things that you and I are talking about now, I would have no idea what they are if I were still in my previous job.
Yeah.
I'm sure still be doing wonderful, rewarding work for USC or for another institution if I were working there. But here's a lot of stuff that I have now learned about philanthropy, about how investments work, and philanthropic investments and philanthropic strategies with high net wealth individuals that I did not have the opportunity to do on a daily basis in my previous work. Now, granted, I came across high net wealth people all the time at USC, a lot of very generous donors. But again, it was always about how's their wealth going to make an impact or fulfill a goal at USC. And that was a wonderful thing at the time. Now I'm working with them, regardless of where their philanthropy goes, about how they're going to optimize their philanthropic impact, period, regardless of where it goes. And that's a different thing.
Very much so. When people are not engaged in conversations with you about their philanthropic contributions to the Jewish Community Foundation of Los Angeles, is there opportunities for those people to engage with the organization, to participate?
That's a really good question. And the answer is not really. And I'll tell you
Okay.
why. We do not have a whole um, robust architecture of volunteer committees. That is not who we are. Now, there is a very large organization here in LA, like they're all in major cities across the US, called the Jewish Federation. The Jewish Federation, there's one in New York City, there's one in Chicago, there's an umbrella organization, Jewish Federations of North America, but all major cities, San Diego, San Francisco, Dallas, Houston, they all have these Jewish federations which do all kinds of, I'm going to use a big word here, programming. That's very similar to an alumni association where you're doing like young professionals programming, you're doing, social groups, you're doing book clubs, you're doing all these things to promote Jewish life. That's what a Jewish federation does. A foundation is like a fundraising arm of the Jewish community. Now, in other cities like San Francisco and New York, their respective foundations are embedded in their federation. So it's kind of like that's how, but not here.
But not in LA.
Because
So it's not an official entity within the Jewish Community Foundation.
we
It's
do have a
separate.
legal, now here's the interesting thing. We do actually have a legal relationship with the
Ah,
federation because we were born out of them. And we also happen to be a tenant in their building. so,
okay.
so,
So
and
you
people,
do
and
have the people, like people who are doing engagement there in the
right.
same building.
And
Yeah.
the great thing is, yeah, and here's the thing. So many of our clients, their philanthropy that they're parking with us ends up becoming granted into the Jewish Federation. So there's a very strong internal relationship. But like if we have, so to go back to your question, if we have clients who want to volunteer their time and they want to make an impact, and other than we do have a board of trustees, because that's who, because we're a nonprofit, so we have a fiduciary board of trustees, which they're the ones who govern the organization, right? And my CEO, he reports to them. That's how a nonprofit works. That's correct. And we have an investment committee. So this is a committee of volunteers who are investment experts, and they obviously advise us on you know investment strategies for. We have $1.5 billion in assets. Okay. So we're the eighth largest foundation in Los Angeles. So they're advising us on investment strategy. So that's another volunteer opportunity. And then we have a professional speaker series. So we work with financial advisors, with attorneys, with wealth managers, and we do a series of speaking engagements for education for them. That's it. So again, while that sounds like a robust set of offerings, we have a 28-member board of trustees, a 15-member investment committee, and then a small planning committee for that professional speaker series. That's it. We don't have like, oh, do you want to go volunteer and clean up a bank, or do you want to do a blood drive? Like some of the either educational or community-based volunteering that you find a lot in higher education, like alumni associations. We don't do that. But I can easily refer somebody to the Federation 2 floors below me because they do all that kind of stuff. I'm just not involved in that work anymore. We don't do events. And by the way, I loved events when I was at USC. I love
Don't
having my
miss it.
weekends back. Thank you very
You don't
much.
miss it. So yeah, so the Federation does more of the engagement, and then you're making recommendations to your clients about
Right.
other philanthropic organizations to
Sure.
contribute, and then you are potentially making connections to those organizations and their engagement initiatives that they might be putting
That's a
on.
really good point. And you know what, Ryan? I love
Yeah.
how you say that because, for example, we're actually doing a field trip, as it were. We're doing a site visit to the Veterans Affairs Clinic here in Los Angeles. And a lot of our clients, either they're veterans themselves or maybe their father, or their mom, but more likely their dad or their uncle served. You know what I mean? So they have an affinity for veteran affairs, right? What happens is we'll take one of our clients on a site visit and they'll get so inspired that we'll then introduce them to the executive director, the CEO of the Veterans Clinic, and then they'll become involved with them as a volunteer. You know what? Awesome. That's our role. we're a convener and a connector. So if we have somebody who's really interested in like the Humane Society, or they're really interested in like a food bank, we have lots of food banks here in LA, you know, and they want to then suddenly volunteer with that organization, we hand them off and make a connection, and it is so rewarding for the client, right? We get a lot of street cred because we're the ones who made the connection. And then the organization itself, let's say the food bank, then they have the benefit now of a super duper passionate volunteer that they would not have found were it not for our involvement.
I think that's fantastic.
It's
Yeah,
super cool. And then I could still be a big sports fan on the side and enjoy all the great things about USA football and women's basketball and the things that I personally love, but I'm not working in it day to day because I'm doing other philanthropic work.
so, what role does culture or tradition or shared experience play in the affinity that your partners have for the Jewish community?
Again, it goes back to, you know, it's like some of the work that you and I have done, Ryan, when you think about strategic planning, right? And what's the first, where do you first start with strategic planning? At the top of that venerated pyramid, you start with values, right? Those are the things that are, and what do we say to the clients, you know, the higher ed clients and the nonprofit clients that you and I have worked with? We talk about these are the evergreen from the
Guiding
moment you were
principles that never change. Yeah.
that never change, that regardless of
Yeah.
the situation, the climate, the environment, the political, you know, je ne sais quoi, whatever is going on in the world, these are the values that you always stick to. And whatever your organization or entity does somehow must be aligned with those values, right? That's really how I look at the work of what we do, that what I do now is that what are your values? Your values are for justice. Your values are for, you know, humanity. Your values are based on community. They're based on, you know, whether it could be very, and you could be a super religious person and be very much based on, let's say, the Bible or the Old Testament or the Ten Commandments, if you want to get down a very religious path, or you want to get down just a very righteous path, right? So again, because we have such a diversity of clients and such a diversity of organizations, some of the organizations we work with, some people would call them very left. You know what I mean? And we're talking politically. And some of the
Yeah.
organizations we work with are very right, and we're talking
Do people
politically.
say that, Pat, to you, Patrick? Are they like, listen, I want to make a gift, but my inclination is to support left based,
Oh, yeah.
political,
And
and they tell you this, right? They're like,
they will. Oh,
yeah,
I've had clients. Listen, I have to be agnostic. I have my own political beliefs, and I'm very,
sure, sure,
very
we all do.
passionate about them. But but this is the same as if you're working at a university. You know, one of your donors might say something where you're like, "Pfft," you know,
Yeah.
like. But it's not your job to judge them. It's your
Yeah.
job to see if how they feel aligns with the need of the institution, right? In a similar vein, because I'm now in this more agnostic, like Switzerland space, where I just want to align their philanthropic interests with philanthropies out there and how can we make that connection, people will say, I am passionate about this. Like, I am passionate about supporting the people on the ground in Israel. Fine. You have some people say, look, I'm passionate about Israel, but I'm very unhappy with the current war, or I'm unhappy with the current government, right? And I I have a lot of dialogue going on in my head, but to them it's like, okay, then how can we align what is most important to you with your philanthropy? And that's what it comes back to. So you can support a variety of different organizations. Some people might feel like now there are some organizations which are out of bounds, right? And this is where the work gets
Yeah. What
interesting.
say more about that? What would make an organization out of bounds?
Yeah, and so here's the deal. What if an organization, you know, with all the political strife we have, and I would say the polarization is pretty profound this day and
Yeah.
age. If somebody wants to, if a nonprofit organization has been found to be doxing people, terrorizing people, because there are some nonprofits, and by the way, some of them unfortunately might be Jewish, but there's a lot of nonprofits out there that that might have an affiliation who are doing some pretty questionable, ethically questionable things. They're still legally qualified as a nonprofit or as a charity, but they might be inciting violence. And there are organizations that do that. Some of them are xenophobic. Some of them are anti Semitic. Some of them are racist. Some of them are Islamophobic outwardly, right? And for some reason, again, because it's beyond our pay grade, we're not the judge, jury, and executioner on who the federal government approves as a nonprofit, right? So there can be a client might come to us and say, I want to support this, that I want to make a grant out of my fund to that. You know what we could say? No, because when you put your funds with us, they're technically, you're a donor advised fund is just that, advise, meaning the money is now part of the foundation. You say, hey, I want to send a $500 grant to my synagogue. Done. You say, hey, I want to send a $500 grant to this organization, and that organization's been all over the news and they're questionable. We could say, we are not having anything to do with that. And the client might say, but it's my money. And our answer is, no, it's not. And legally, it is not their money. These are some of the, and by the way, these are the exceptions rather than the rules. I don't deal with this on a daily basis. You know what I mean? But
Yeah, I'd imagine not.
occasionally, a client would introduce themselves to me and say, how do you feel at that? Well, here's what I don't like. And they might make a comment about our federal government in the United States, about our state governor, our mayor in Los Angeles. They can have any opinion. And that strongly informs their philanthropy. And you know what? That's fine. The only time we will put up a roadblock is if the designated charity that they want to support is like, and this is where, I remember we talked about the Center for Design Philanthropy and they're vetting the nonprofits. They keep their finger on the pulse of what's going on. So they're aware that because what happens is when a grant is issued to, let's say, UCLA, UCLA is going to receive a $10,000 grant from the Jewish Community Foundation, thanks to Patrick Auerbach, because I'm the fund holder. So it's like the community foundation's the one turning over the money, and I'm getting what in higher ed you would call a soft credit, right? However, think about if there's an untoward nonprofit doing all kinds of bad things. The last thing that the Jewish Community Foundation or any charity worth its salt wants to do is support an organization like that that could bring your foundation into disrepute. You know what I mean? To where they could say, whatever the foundation is, they're supporting this and this organization's been accused. So we really want to we want to honor the philanthropic intentions of our clients, and at the same time keep our noses and our community's collective nose clean.
So, given that you have your own political views and so do your clients that you work with, and when you're having these conversations, as you just described, I've no doubt opinions get shared. Do you have to remain totally agnostic, opinionless, or are you
No,
able
but it's
to?
professional. I don't. I could say what I want, but professionally, yeah. I mean, we all can. But think about
Yeah,
like when you were at Longwood, right?
yeah,
When
yeah,
you were running the alumni shop and the career shop at Longwood, and you would have an alum who said something. You're like, okay, you're out of, in your brain. Your internal dialogue is you're out of your mind. You are not going to engage with them now. If somebody comes along and complains to you about something going on in the world, and they are right up your alley, you can agree with them, but you still really don't want to go there. You know what I mean?
mm,
Because in your role, word can get out. Like, oh yeah, I talked to
yeah. You
Ryan
wouldn't
and yeah, he
necessarily
feels
want
exactly
to
like I do.
have you wouldn't necessarily want to have biases associated with you,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
Exactly. So you can feel, and again, and I feel that this line of my work, while it's a different nuance than my previous work at USC, I think it goes across the board that when you're doing this type of engagement work with diverse constituencies and you're trying to get them to align their values with your organization, it's not that every single one of their values is going to completely match yours personally or the organization's. You just have to find that there's still an overall match. And this stuff's been going on forever. This isn't just new. This isn't specific to the Jewish community. It isn't specific to like one institution. I mean, universities can make some controversial decisions, right? And it can upset part of the donor base, right? And the donor base can be really put off by it. How do you, when you're on a college campus, when you're in a university development office, negotiate and navigate through those nuances? That's something that I used to do a lot of when I was in that world. And now that I'm in this world, this community foundation world, I'm still doing that, but with just different rules of the game. And that's totally fine. That's par for the course. That's part of doing this work, is that you're not dealing with a monolithic community. You don't deal with monolithic communities in terms of an alumni community for an institution. And with this community, I am not dealing with the monolithic community by any stretch of the imagination.
I imagine you've had a lot of thoughts reflecting on your time doing alumni work and the work
Yeah.
that you're doing now. What should higher ed or education organizations more broadly take from affinity-based organizations like the Jewish Community
Yeah,
Foundation?
it's a really interesting question because higher ed has a reputation problem right now, as we know. It's under attack, and it's unfortunate. And I could see why with some of the was I think some of the optics that have happened across college campuses the last few years. I think that higher education, even before, let's say, the Middle East wars and conflicts that are currently plaguing the world, even before that, when there was a lot of scrutiny about endowments and about why are institutions exempt from why these institutions with this multi-billion-dollar endowments, why are they tax exempt when they're quote unquote making money? So higher education, and plus the cost of higher education, right? There are all kinds of perception problems that are extremely unique to higher education that did not develop overnight. This has been a slow train coming for decades, right? I mean, I was on one particular campus as an employee for over 23 years. So I saw that some of the profound issues that the institution faces today are not the result of one person or the result of 2 or 3 years, but this is a collective, longitudinal, if you will, to use some academic terms, scientific terms, result of years and years and years of how the enterprise has developed. So it's right now to look at what can higher education learn from a community foundation. The pressures are completely different right now. The mission of the foundation for which I work now is to strengthen our community to make the world a better place, which is very, very broad. The mission of my former employer was, well, not the mission, but the objective for the work I was doing was get as many people as in love with this place as possible because we better raise money because we have to, you know what I mean? It's a very different sort of urgency. So it's really hard to tell what can higher ed learn from community foundations. I mean, I think that, again, not to cast any aspersion on anything, I think that there's a lot of administrative bloat and overhead in higher education that needs to be seriously examined and thinned out. And we don't have that on the foundation level. But then again, I'm only dealing with 1,400 clients. We have of our $1.5 billion in assets, that's across 1,400 different clients. So the scale is extremely different. But at the
Yeah.
same time, an institution might have an annual, might have assets of $6 or $7 billion a couple $1 billion, and the foundation for which I work is $1.5 billion. So that might say, well, that's very similar. But I think what the higher education institution is expected to deliver is far more complex. So it's really hard then to say, what can an institution learn from us? Now, if you want to just narrow it down to what the development function can learn, I think they could learn a lot because right now I think there's way too much territorialism in higher education. And when I was at USC for so many years, it's a wonderful tier one private research institution, right? And I thought that all the drama that I had to deal with when it came to like academic units, campus partners, athletics, student affairs, all these different units, and everyone's trying to fundraise for themselves. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is such a crazy dynamic in private schools. Then, when I started meeting my colleagues at public schools and my alma mater, my undergrad alma mater is UCLA, which, USC and UCLA are, two world-renowned institutions that share a city. They're 11 and a half miles apart. By the way, the crow flies probably less than 10 miles apart. I thought that the public school didn't have the same issues we had with compartmentalization and territorialism and all these fiefdoms. And it's exactly the same. So it's not even a private thing. So I look at now, that's a huge problem. And you heard it with many of the conferences that you attended, both as an alumni chief and now as a consultant, that campus partnerships and fiefdoms and, decentralized model are huge problems at institutions. So what can an institution perhaps learn from a foundation? Get rid of those,
Yeah.
centralize. But again, there's a lot of dynamics they would have to deal with that I don't have to deal with because we have a grand total of 30 employees and they have hundreds or thousands of employees. So it's not so simple.
Well, it strikes me that one of the dynamics here that you described for the Jewish Community Foundation is that you're talking to your clients about it, giving with and through the foundation to make the world a better place. And
Exactly.
one of the things we learned from the most recent alumni survey, National Alumni Survey, was that particularly donors under the age of 45, they're giving to organizations like yours and not to their alma mater because that's what they want to do with their dollars. They want to give to causes. And institutions, you meant from a development perspective, we really need to figure out how to describe the changing of the world that institutions like your alma mater or your former employer or any institution
Right.
are doing by having philanthropy focused with and through those universities. And
Yeah, I agree,
something of
Ryan.
a
I think
language challenge there, something of a positioning problem, maybe.
that was a word I was just going to mention was I think they have to reposition themselves as a cause. And right now,
Yeah.
they are not viewed that way. They're viewed as these financial behemoths. You know what I mean? Because a lot of them are. They have very. Here's the thing: they have very, very strong brand recognition, which I think helps you and it hurts you. And the way it doesn't. I don't know if it hurts or if it's just more of an impediment, because for example, when you get one of these headline grabbing 8-figure gifts, you know what I mean? You get a $50 million gift to name this school at this university. Then when you're calling, when your annual fund folks are dialing for dollars, right? Or your major gift officers are trying to go and raise a $50,000 gift to support a scholarship, the response might be, I just saw in the news you got $50 million. What's my 50K is not going to do anything. It's a drop in the bucket. That's a really hard dynamic, and it's a reality. It is a reality. So the institutions then have to reposition and retell their story in a very different way to bring it down to where the philanthropist, or in this case, the alum or the donor, is going to understand that their $50,000 will make a very specific impact. And that's where I think right now there are a lot of very steep challenges with institutions.
We live in a moment where affinity and identity engagement has definitely swung back another direction. It was heavily emphasized in the years preceding this current administration
Right,
and before, and now this pendulum has kind of swung the other way
right.
towards treating everybody, all groups, the same and creating more pan-institution types of strategies. What role do you think identity should play in today's engagement strategies, now putting your higher ed hat back on?
I think when I look at the successes that we had at USC, I think one of the biggest successes is that you were able to align the identity with the institution. When you had certain groups that felt marginalized from the institution with no interest in alignment, because believe it or not, they thought, well, the institution doesn't understand me, so I don't understand the institution. I think that when an identity group thrives is when they can find common ground. Okay. So I think that there is, but so that the identity can be celebrated and respected, but that at the end of the day, that being supportive of like that particular community, that ethnic group, that ethnic, if it's a group based on like a particular, like whether it's Black or Latino or Asian Pacific or, what Lambda LGBTQ plus, that there has to be something that aligns between the values or the cultural values of those specific identity groups and the mission of the institution. And when you can find alignment, it's a beautiful thing. The problem is sometimes when they don't see eye to eye, there is a significant rift in the organization. Not in the organization per se, but the organization is not going to be as effective because both sides do not feel heard. And that's a problem. And that has to really, so you do want to be able to have the identity group or community be an entry point, but the identity group also needs to understand that they wouldn't exist were it not for the university. Not that the community exists. And we'll give an example here. Let's say, again, hypothetical, that the Latino community here in LA, it's the largest, the Latinos are the largest, population group in LA. Whether you look at the county or the city, they're a plurality or a majority or both. Now, it's a thriving community. The reason that the Latino community at USC also is thriving is because they are a very strong organization which has made deliberate attempts to align their values with the institution while keeping to who they are at the same time. And that is and that didn't happen overnight. That happened through decades of very hard work and a lot of dialogue and transparency. There are other groups at USC which haven't been as robust because there's this thing where they feel like this is our community and USC just doesn't understand us. And USC doesn't understand that. But those are very nuanced and complicated. I'm just saying that where I've seen successes is when people can use the identity as a pathway to being involved in the institution. Now, the flip side is you want to be very careful at an institution of higher education if you see somebody of a particular persuasion and they walk through the front door. The worst thing you could do is say, if you think that they're Black because they appear Black. Oh, hi, how are you? Hi, the Black Alumni Association's down the hall. That is the worst thing you can do because they're coming to the Alumni Association because the Alumni Association is for everybody. And if they happen to express a particular affinity for, let's say, supporting Black students, then you introduce them to the Black alumni because that's part of the Black Alumni Association's, very specific role. But you have to be really careful about making assumptions about people. And one of the things that I found to be such a rewarding success is that we had many Black alumni, Latino alumni, Asian Pacific alumni, Lambda LGBTQ plus alumni who found their way into very high volunteer positions at USC, not through their specific organization. And so what I really valued was we were sending very highly, wonderful, passionate, supportive volunteers from our channels centrally to the community-specific alumni association and vice versa. And that's when, when it's a two-way street and you're informing each other's work, it's amazing. When it only goes one way, it's not. It's not terrible. It's just certainly not optimal, and you're really cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Is it fair to say that the Jewish Community Foundation of Los Angeles works with and through Hillel foundations, Hillel organizations in order to
Hello, yeah,
support college campuses? Is that
we
a
don't.
connective
Again,
thread?
it's a nuance. The Federation will work with them on
The
programming and stuff,
Federation,
but
okay.
a lot of our clients support their local Hillels.
Yeah.
But just to throw another complication, there's also a more religious campus life organization called Chabad, spelled Chabad. Now, Chabad and Hillel sometimes conflict because they both
They
think
butt
they have
heads.
the best interests of the Jewish community at heart. But Chabad's mission is actually very different than Hillel's. Hillel is specifically for campus life at institutions all over the United States. Chabad has a mission to bring Judaism and Jewish practice to Jews wherever they are. So you could be like in some freaking, desert in, I don't know, in sub-Saharan Africa, or you could be at some, you could be in a remote place in Canada that doesn't have like a formal synagogue, but they have a few dozen Jewish families that want to come together and practice and celebrate their faith. That's what Chabad takes care of. So they're very different dynamics. And my point is that our foundation works with both.
All right. Last question for you, my friend. Tell me what aspect of your job brings you the most joy? What are you most excited about as you look ahead over the next year or so?
Continuing to learn, continuing to get to know these amazing clients. I mean, there's an expression, and you may have heard it called a mensch, when someone's a mensch. The technical meaning of the word mensch, and it's German or Yiddish, is man. That's what mensch means. But in the colloquial way, God, they're such a mensch, it means they're a good person. I find that the clients I work with are so menschy. It's like I go and I have a cup of coffee with them, and they talk about how their grandparents came to the US with, excuse my language, not a pot to pee in, right? That they came dirt poor and they embraced American values, which I think, by the way, I'll be political. I think a lot of people today come to the United States and expect to be taken care of. Whereas I know that my mother, who was not born here, and none of my grandparents was born here, they came here and kissed the ground when they got here because they were grateful for the freedom and they were grateful to escape oppression. And they worked their tails off to develop the American dream, right? I meet people like that all the time in this work. Now, maybe they're of my generation, so they're one or two generations removed from the toil and the hardship of coming to America and creating a life here. But I find that they are incredibly philanthropically oriented and they want to volunteer. And again, we don't have necessarily a lot of volunteer opportunities for them, but we certainly try to connect them. I love finding these people. I love meeting these people, learning of their passions, and helping them create their philanthropic journey. I think that's just awesome work. And of course, it's always fun when someone finds out that I worked at USC for 23 years and they go, oh, well, I guess I'm going to have to put up with you, but I love UCLA. So there. And I'm like, well, actually, so do I, because
Yeah,
that's where I
yeah,
went
yeah.
to
You could
undergrad.
just play both cards, right?
And trust me, when I was at USC, I couldn't do that. Now that I'm at a neutral foundation, I do it all the time
You do it all the
because
time.
we
Yeah,
have many clients who are Bruins and many clients who are Trojans. And it's a fun conversation to have.
I bet it is. All right, let's leave it there. Patrick, so good to see you, my friend. Thank you so much for your time and for being this week's keynote on speaking engagement.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I hope that everybody learns something. And I'm looking forward to continuing to do more great work with you because you've really become quite the voice in the nonprofit space. And the materials and the content you put out there, I think, is something that people should truly value. So thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
No, that's nice of you to say. Thanks, my friend. All right, bye bye.